Jimmie Jean Cook was the historic preservation pioneer for Central Whidbey Island. Her impact can still be seen and felt in Coopville today. She single-handedly created the Central Whidbey Historic District that placed Coopville on the National Register of Historic Places.
Her first love was art. That was what her background was in. And so she had a particular eye, right, for seeing the art in her community. And I say art like this, right? I don't mean the paintings or sculptures or anything like that, but she could see the intrinsic aesthetic value of the community itself, the architecture and the landscape and the people who lived in it.
Marion Frances, Jimmie Jean Cook, was born on April 1st, 1922 in Douglas, Kansas. She was the fourth of 5 children born to James and Marion Cook. The nickname Jimmie Jean was given to her as a child.
I think part of it, if I was to speculate, is the relationship between Jimmie Jean and her mother was at best cold. And I doubt if she wanted to even be named Marion.
Whatever the reason, the nickname stuck. For the rest of her life, she went by Jimmie Jean Cook. Jimmie Jean graduated from Newton High School in Newton, Kansas in 1940. After high school, she briefly worked in Washington, D.C. before taking a clerical position at Boeing in Wichita. Looking for a way to serve her country, Jimmie Jean joined the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps on May 8, 1943. She was initially stationed in Des Moines, Iowa, before being sent to London to join the mapping section of the Intelligence Division. Utilizing her artistic talents, she created maps for the Allies, including those for the Normandy invasion. Later, her unit was relocated to Paris, France. There, the CAT distribution system found her. Cesspool, Ceci for short, received her own knitted army sweater, complete with patches made by Jimmie Jean. After Jimmie Jean completed her service, Cesspool traveled back to the United States with the necessary documentation. Using her GI Bill, Jimmie Jean attended the University of Kansas to pursue a degree in fine arts. While on a break from university, she visited her parents, who had already moved to Coopville. After graduating from college in 1949, Jimmie Jean moved to Coopville to be closer to her family. To make ends meet, she worked at and lived out of her shop, Craney's Curios, present-day Wharf Dog. When her sister Yvonne, nicknamed Bonnie, accepted a position with the Army in Japan, Jimmie Jean took over her position at the auditor's office. She continued to work for the auditor's office until she retired.
She recorded deeds, and it was kind of not exactly like the country store, but as a result, she got to know a lot of people because you'd see them year in and year out. So she got to know county residents, and they got to know her.
Almost immediately after arriving, she became involved in various community organizations. In 1949, she joined the board of the Island County Historical Society as its corresponding secretary. She helped establish the Coopville Garden Club and contributed numerous handmade posters and artworks for community events, even creating a papier-mâché lion costume for the Central Whidbey Lions Club. She also played a role in establishing the Arts and Crafts Festival that is still held in Coopville every August. Additionally, she taught Sunday school at the Methodist Church until she left the church over a church and state dispute.
She thought that, and maybe the pastor did, make a recommendation about a political candidate or a political issue, and in her view of the world, there was black and there was white and there was right and there was wrong.
Jimmie Jean got to work preserving this area, starting with Sunnyside Cemetery. She inventoried the historic grave sites that had become overgrown with vegetation. She and a few residents banded together to create the Central Whidbey Cemetery District. On November 5, 1964, voters in Central Whidbey approved the establishment of a new taxing district to to care for Sunnyside Cemetery. Sunnyside Cemetery saw significant improvements in the decades following the establishment of the cemetery district. Regulations were put in place, and regular maintenance ensured that the cemetery's appearance matched its stunning setting on the hillside above Eby's Prairie. But her crowning achievement was the Central Whitby Historic District. She single-handedly created the boundaries and completed the research. At that time, many Victorian structures had fallen into disrepair, and several had already been demolished. In the early 1970s, the Washington State Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation approached Coopville residents with the idea of designating a section along the waterfront as historic. The project changed hands a few times before Jimmie Jean took on the task single-handedly. Jimmie Jean used the resources available to her at the auditor's office and at the Island County Historical Society. On December 27, 1973, much of Central Whitby, including 91 historic structures and sites, was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The town of Coopville adopted guidelines in the form of a town ordinance and created a Historic Preservation Advisory Board.
That district is going to be the golden goose for having Eby's Landing National Historical Reserve formed, because the Department of Interior, the National Park Service are not created to save pretty farmland, right? So there had to be something about this pretty farmland that made it worthy of the protection and the honor of being a unit of the National Park Service. So if it hadn't been for Jimmie Jean's work on the Historic District, we no doubt would not have Eby's Reserve here.
The Central Whitby Historic District laid the groundwork for the creation of Eby's Landing National Historic Reserve. Roberta Smith, an owner of a key segment of Eby's Prairie, was approached about developing a portion of her property into high-rise condominiums and residential plots.
Roberta was pretty desperate, and so developers had their eyes on the property, and so they gave her a song and dance about how they could help her, and they were interested in helping themselves. So anyway, the community, when realized that, hey, this thing may happen, the community started to pull together, and that's when we almost went to war here.
A group of concerned citizens, including Jimmie Jean Cook, brainstormed ways to preserve the area. This group became known as the Friends of Eby's.
The opinion was that we were doing something that we shouldn't be doing. Property development was a big thing at that time.
Basically, it was the fundamental private property rights issue, and at that time it was very unpopular to try to tell somebody what they could do with their land.
The Friends of Eby's campaigned for years to preserve the prairie.
Because we felt that if they were going to sell the property, and then if it were sold to the government, if it were sold to a private developer, if it was sold to the state, it really wouldn't make much difference as long as they received the, just compensation. And that's the point we approached it from.
We really went nowhere legally, other than just it gave us time to look for sources of funding and other ways to try to preserve the land.
Finally, on November 10th, 1978, Public Law 95-625 passed, establishing Eby's Landing National Historic Reserve, the first historic reserve in the country.
I think people owe an obligation to the future. If they have something of value, they should preserve it for the future. It's not just for your use or my use here and now, but for children, generations to come.
Jimmie Jean Cook moved to Anacortes in 1986. She died peacefully in her sleep in 1991. She's buried at Sunnyside Cemetery, overlooking the prairie she fought so hard to preserve.